Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. I'm Ron Paul, the host.
And I'm Daniel McAdams, your co-host. Dr. Paul, I noticed you've written a new article that's just come out, and it's really very interesting. It's The Green Light for the American Empire, and you really trace this big push for the American Empire back to 1990.
That's right, and there are other people right now writing articles about the 25-year war, 1990, something different happened. And I've been fascinated with that date, so I went back thinking about how important it is. Actually, I learned some things by just checking on this current history, because I have always believed that the most significant political, especially a geopolitical item in my lifetime was the downfall of the Soviet Union. And I never realized how closely connected the downfall of the Soviet Union was to the tremendous growth of the American empire. You know, we've been around and we've been building and we've been overseas for a long time, and we've had our Cold War and the competition all going on. But all of a sudden, there was an amazing amount of connections starting in 89, but really in 90, some of the events that came together. But you know, our friend Michael Rosef has written about this, and he calls, his dates sort of coincide with what I'm talking about, in that the war that we're in started in 1990. We didn't get our peace dividend. It looks like the military-industrial complex got their dividend out of this. So we didn't usher in a great time for peace. And he called it the Great War II. Yeah. And he called the Great War I was, you know, Woodrow Wilson's World War I, the Great War for making the world safe for democracy. So he dated from 1914, and he called it the end of that in 1990. And now we're in that second war of making the world. And of course, he's not very optimistic about it either. And then somebody else has a page out that does it constantly. They call it the Long War. And, you know, that's a pretty good name, too. But I came up with the name. It's never easy to come up with the perfect name, but I guess a little wishful thinking on my part. I want to call it the Last War. Hopefully, this is the last war that we're going to have, where it's designed to just grow an empire and then see the destruction of the empire and have constant Cold Wars and whatnot. So I want it to be the last war, but only time will tell on this. But just very briefly, some of the dates that I came across that I'm sure you're very familiar with, but to me it was amazing how they came together. And you know, 89, we remember the Berlin Wall going down, but I forgot that just a couple months before that, guess what? The Soviets had to wimp out of Afghanistan, surrender and walk out. So the Soviet system collapsed, they lose in Afghanistan, and the Berlin Wall comes down. And then the other thing is, in the early part of 1990, the Central Committee for the Communist Party had a meeting. And I don't remember reading about this, but that meeting, they conceded and gave up all their political power, which led to a short period of time to what, 15 of their republics just dissipating and disappearing. So I don't know, I guess you've thought a little bit about, say, April Glaspie. You recall a little bit of that story, I'm sure.
It's true, and what I noticed from your article, I remember 1990, I think I was just going into grad school, and all of these things were happening, and they seemed at the time bewildering. The world was changing so rapidly, and these things seemed to be sort of disparate things that were happening separately. And I think one of the things you did in the essay is you drew them together into sort of a common theme, and you tied it all together to the U.S. response to the changing world was really boiled down to the meeting between April Glaspie and Saddam Hussein back in July of 1990.
And you know, there was a little controversy. It remains controversial now whether she really gave the green light. But one thing for sure that you can be certain of is that Saddam Hussein was our ally. We allied with him through all the 80s, helping him fight the Iranians. And after that meeting, and there's documentation of pretty strong words of saying we don't even deal with Arab-to-Arab border disputes. And she met with him in July 25th of 1990. And 1 week later, he invaded. So in his mind, I don't think anybody could argue that he didn't get a green light. So, but then the big thing would be if you're going to try to satisfy all the conspiracies and all, did our government just blunder, or did our government sort of say, hey, you know, neocons like events that they can respond to, and they certainly got the event that they needed, because then quickly thereafter we essentially declared war, although we didn't go into Kuwait until January of the next year.
And we had a new purpose.
Yeah,
it was interesting when we were preparing for this. I went back and looked over the transcript, and what I was astonished by, you know, looking at it again, is how friendly the language was between Glaspie and Hussein. We have great friendship, great respect for your country. We know that we'd like to have you have economic success. You could easily see, if the transcript is accurate, how if you're Saddam Hussein, you're feeling pretty good now that they understand.
You know, I don't want to go over the whole article. Maybe nobody will want to read my article, but I do want to mention one other date that sort of fascinated me, because you know it was July and August when the green light occurred, and the world events were changing, and the Soviets were collapsing. But also, interestingly enough, on 9/11. 9/11, 1990, which is has to be a coincidence, you know. It can't be related. But 9/11, 90 is when George Bush gave a speech to both houses of the Congress, and the speech was entitled "Toward a New World Order." And you know, I remember that very clearly, and my comment was, because you know, the conspiracy people who were just ridiculed for talking about that, well, maybe there's going to be a new world order come one of these days, and who knows what would happen. This was the first time I ever remembered somebody in a powerful position said, that is what our goal. And unfortunately, the New World Order is what I saw and see now as being something I consider pretty negative.
Yeah, that's true. You know, and it was I think the defense industry was terrified by the end of the Cold War. The propaganda, the overthrow, you know, the regime change industry was terrified by it. And I remember thinking, what's going to be our foreign policy now? You know, what's going to happen? And they filled the gap pretty quickly.
And you know, whether this is deliberate or accidental events, you know, the neoconservatives always respond, and they did something a few years later as they were continuing to organize the project for a new America. You know,
a new American century.
New American century. That was in '97.
Yeah.
And they got together, and boy, you can read all about what they do, but the two major things they wanted was more military spending, and when are we going to attack Iraq? You know, this was the whole thing that they were talking about, and it
was Bill Kristol, Robert Kagan, all of the people that are still allowing control of the foreign policy.
Yeah, so I wanted to find out who our heroes were that signed the first letter. I think they were sending that would have gone to Clinton.
Yeah.
So the letter was signed, and I looked at the fourth name. At that particular time, he was a candidate for governor of Florida. His name was Jeb Bush. He signed on there. So somebody told me the other day, well, Jeb Bush isn't too bad, and he looks a lot better than his dad, or you know, his brothers and his dad. And I said, well, I think he has some explaining to do, but guess what? Nobody's going to ask him that question in the debates.
No, and if you look at his circle of foreign policy advisors, they're all the same people, the same gang he hung out with at the time, so it's not very
So he's more likely, his advisors are more closely to George Bush Jr. Than
Kristol,
the realists.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I hope you'll be interested and tune in, because we will post this article. And I want to thank you for coming on and watching the Ron Paul Liberty Report, and come back soon.